A very good evening to all the lovely attendees at the Kids Animation and More Summit. My name is Anil Vanvari, and I'm very, very happy to present to you Nayna Agrawal, a writer from Hollywood. She's been through all of it, writing for live action, writing for animation, and she's seen it all. Apart from writing for theater as well, she's been a playwright, and on top of it, she has been an analyst in finance. She's a BS in economics. It's a varied exposure and background that she's had. Welcome, Naina. It's great to have you here.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Anilji. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about writing for animation in Hollywood. How does it work? And you know, uh, how did you traverse the entire rugged and the rough path that writers have to go through? What has the journey been like?
Yeah, I think so for me personally, just to share a bit about me, because I do think unlike other careers that I've had, including finance, as you mentioned, and I worked on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. in legislative affairs, and then I worked in international aid for 10 years, more or less, working in gender parity programming. All of those paths of mine, all of those careers were pretty defined. There were ways to find those jobs, find mentors, grow. There were certifications and accreditations. I found that was not the case with writing. I went back to school to get my master's degree in stage and screenwriting at Northwestern University, which is near Chicago in the US. And for me, it was very new to take this path. And I was in my mid to late 30s at that point. So it was quite scary to say I'm going into this new career and reinventing myself without knowing how to define this path. So to answer your question, I think a lot of it was threefold. It was becoming a good writer. It was becoming a good networker. And then I think it was becoming a good assistant. I think those were all the different paths that I took. Was that how do people get to know my work ethic? How do I find somebody who can take me under his or her wing? And then how do I become a writer that is deserving of a chance to be staffed in a room? So I think as those three things converged, I ultimately, through both the Northwestern program and just developing contacts there, and then moving to Los Angeles, I got my start as an assistant on a show called Grey's Anatomy, which has been on for 18 seasons in the US and worldwide. It's got quite the following. And just I would get coffee for everyone and just learning the trade and learning the world. And that's a live action show, but I think a lot of things in TV and in Hollywood are universal. And that idea of being an assistant and finding your way is one way to break in. And that was part of it for me. The other aspect was I was first and foremost a playwright. And I got the most attention initially as a playwright and less so as a TV animation or live action writer. So I think finding whatever makes you stand out, what brings you joy, what gives you traction. There's no one right answer, which is, I think for many of us, very frustrating and scary, but I also think can be very rewarding because that's so much of this writing journey is it's so personal and it's so subjective. It defies a lot of our very binary way of thinking in like the engineering world or in the legal world or in the medical world. Once I got into animation, it was really due to these diversity programs, namely the Sesame Street Writers Program, which takes place in New York City. Every year, they take about 5 to 7 fellows from somewhere between, I think, 500 and 1,000 applicants. I can't remember exactly from my year. And then you have mentors from HBO, from a lot of the major networks in the US. And then you write your first pilot. And I'll come back to that in a second because that speaks a lot to animation writing. But you write your first pilot and then you pitch your idea to Sesame Street, and they may choose after the program is over to continue to work with you to develop that idea. And so I was very fortunate that after the 10-week program, they chose me and I got to get paid to develop this idea further. And so that was a great benefit. And that then led to doors opening for me to freelance on Netflix shows, on DreamWorks shows, on Disney shows. I worked on Mira Royal Detective, which is a Disney Junior show. But I think it was building the momentum through my writing, through my networking, through my mentor, through my assistantships.
Okay, that's interesting. In terms of let's say how different was writing how different is writing for live action versus writing for animation, and what is the process like, in terms of the creative process, the writer's room, and how do I, I'm asking you many questions right now, how do I, as a beginner, how do I go about writing an animation sample? Where does it begin, where does it end? I know you're going to do a writing masterclass after this, where you will put us through all the paces. But if you could just give me a broad encompass that for me and let me know that.
Yeah, I think it starts with an idea. I think it starts with what is exciting to you about this idea that you have. So for me, I told a story about a little girl who looks different than a lot of her classmates, right? Because I grew up Indian and I had different hair, different skin tone than I did from my other classmates in the US. So it was finding what is the story that I'm trying to tell? And the theme was about self-acceptance, because the more my character is trying to conform, the more she realizes she has to be herself. And so that was kind of the theme of the story, is that everybody wants to be somebody else when they're a kid, or everybody wants to fit in. But what is that journey you go on to really celebrate who you are and your differences, good, bad, or otherwise? So that's what really resonated with Sesame Street. So for me, first and foremost, it is think about what you're excited to share. What is the story you want to tell? What is the message that really resonates with you? And how does it come across on the page? So I would say that's the first thing. Then I think it's really, building out, and to your point, Anilji, maybe we'll talk about this later, but I think it is really building out that world. Who are the characters? What is the time? What is the world? What is the tone? What is the engine? And by engine, I mean, what are we seeing week to week or episode to episode? It has to be specific enough that we care about the show, but it has to be broad enough that you can create a lot of material. So that's always a challenge. And that's where I think theme really plays into the engine of, like, okay, what is the thing that we're tuning into every week to see? Um, and then I think from there you start to build out what we often call the Bible, which is basically your composite of, take me through, anywhere from 4 to 12 pages of what this show is and how you would pitch it to an exec to consider buying it or optioning it. And then from there, it can take on various stages, but staffing in particular, to go back to one of your questions about the difference between live action and animation, I think a big part of animation is, especially when we're focused on kids, is the setup in the room is very different. So often you're a freelance writer. Sometimes you're a staff writer, but freelance means you're just getting the episode. Staff writer means, you're more involved in the room on a day-to-day basis. So there's that aspect that I think is more common in animation in the US than in live action in the US. I also think that our budgets are night and day. So often in live action, our budgets are far grander than it is, particularly in kids animation. It's different in terms of pay. It's different in terms of episode budget. It's different in terms of resources. So again, not always the case, but very often. And then the last thing I'll say about animation, and we may get into this later, is when you think of an animated idea, you really want to be able to say, how is this different from live action? Why can this not be live action? So if my story, for example, is about 3 best friends who go on adventures in their backyard every day and learn about a new animal, let's say it's a preschool show, why is that better suited for animation? Is there something magical? Is there something elevated from reality? Is there something hyperbolic in the way they experience the world? Children often especially have these larger than life experiences and look at the world with brand new eyes. Is that why you want it to be animated versus live action? So I would say that that's such a big tenet for us as animation writers to know, is why is the world unable to be live action?
Okay, so you said the animation room is slightly different from a live action writer's room. Could you go into a few more details?
Sure. So right now I'm on a live action show, and it's quite hierarchical. There's there are about 10 positions, if I'm just guessing off the, or gauging off the top of my head, between being a staff writer and a showrunner in live action. So, you know, you start at staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, then there's producers, and then there's showrunner. So roughly 10 positions. There's less of that, particularly in kids animation. In adult animation, so, you know, if you're familiar with The Simpsons, there may be similar rankings, but often in kids animation, it's simply staff writer, story editor, which means something very different in animation than it does in live action. So very confusing. And then you have the showrunner. So the various roles and the rankings are very, very different.
Yeah, and you're also governed by a different association or a union.
A different
For
union
instance,
often, yes.
absolutely, yeah,
That
yeah.
Yeah, that also depends too, because there are some adult animation shows, The Simpsons, I think, for one, um, but there's others. I think Bob's Burgers and maybe American Dad and a few others are under the WGA. So the WGA is the Writers Guild of America, and that is largely known as the Union for Live Action Writers, but it also includes animated shows, which are more the exception than the rule, but there are exceptions. Then the Animation Guild is largely animated shows and features.
Okay. And do they have strict hours of working, or are you like the Screen Actors Guild has rules, has very set rules. Is it only about wages, or is it only about working conditions under these two, if I may ask?
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, I'm not the foremost authority on this, but what I will say is that it has to do with, you know, conditions in which you work. So to your point, Anilji, like how many hours a day are you working? You know, are you getting paid per week or per episode or both? You know, how will your credits appear? Um, what are some other things? Oh, like your IP. So depending on if you're in development and creating your own show, who owns the IP, who gets credit for the IP. So there's a lot of things that I'm still learning with each show and every experience, how uh, the legal aspect and the protection of the artist comes into play by way of the union.
Okay. You've been in the industry now. It's been what? How many years has it been in the industry as a writer?
I would say about 7 years.
So you've kind of fast tracked over there. Do you think you fast tracked? I would like to believe that, because I
That's
know
what I
writers
hear
will.
from a lot of my contemporaries and from my mentors and my my showrunners. They're like, wow, you've done a lot in 7 years. So I trust their judgment and their gauge better than I do, because they've been in it far longer.
So what's contributed to that? I mean, what has been your work ethic? What has been the way you've been, what made you different or
I think
makes you
it,
different?
yeah, I think it was, first of all, I came into the industry when I was a lot older. I was probably in my late 30s, and I think you just know yourself better. I think it's so hard to know yourself in your 20s and not to feel that anxiety of, oh my God, I'm supposed to do everything, be everything, make everyone happy, be always happy. It's just so much stress for 20-year-olds. And I feel for them, because I think there's something really lovely about aging and growing up. I think you just know how to prioritize. I think you know how the world works. I think you know yourself better. So I definitely knew my strengths and weaknesses. I definitely knew the nature of people, how to conduct myself in business. I'm a very emotional person. That's one of my benefits, or that's one of my assets, excuse me, as a writer, but it can also be, for lack of a better word, a weakness, because I'll let emotions cloud my judgment sometimes of people. So I don't think I could articulate that in my 20s. And now in my 40s, I can say, okay, this is a thing I do. Watch out for that. You know, how are you going to manage your expectations, manage your emotions? So I think that was part of the success, is just being older and I think wiser in the sense of how the world works and where I fit into it. I think another thing was just the work ethic. You just receive every day. I still receive so many rejections, and for the most part, they don't bother me. Um, I kind of wear them as badges of honor for the most part. I mean, every now and again, sure, I get upset and I eat a pint of ice cream and I think, how is this possible? But overall, I really just think that's part of life. I'd much rather take chances and fail than not take chances at all. And that is very much my personality. Like, that's not just specific to writing, that's specific to dating, that's specific to making friends, that's specific to crossing the street, trying a new sport. I just, I'm not so worried about failing. And in this industry, you will get rejected a lot. So if that's something that bothers you, I think, be sensitive to that, understand if that's something worth combating, because you will probably experience a lot of that in this industry. And then I think another thing I would attribute to my success is just the work ethic, like just networking a lot, writing lots of scripts, working crazy hours for very little pay as an assistant. I think that trifecta really set me on a path where when people met me, they're like, this is a person who comes to work with a very positive, humble attitude and is always willing to learn. I once had a boss, a showrunner, say to me, you always love to meet with me, and people often don't like to meet with their boss. And I thought, oh my gosh, how is that possible? Why wouldn't people want more time with their boss? And she said, because, a boss is going to tell you often what you need to improve on, and people don't want to hear what they need to improve on. And for me, I love to hear that. I mean, I like to consider my source and the way in which they're sharing it with me, but I'm always happy to learn what I can do differently and how to grow. So I think that's part of it too, is the attitude of, I'm always learning. I always am curious, and I always want from my mentors or from whoever is being respectfully guiding me to be open to it. And so I think I carry that attitude of gratitude, and I think people see that.
And your accent and your skin, the diversity that is prevalent in Hollywood now, or with the attempt at showing diversity, was that a help in any way, or was it something which an Indian who's trying to break into Hollywood or trying to break into writing should not consider at all?
I think so. I couldn't give you a strong gauge, like a metric to say, oh yeah, this definitely helped me by X% on in Y instances, something that's more statistics specific. I can say that to me, it's more based on the individual's journey. I think we all have hardships and things that are working against us, so to speak. And whether that's ethnicity, whether that's gender, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's you're differently abled, you have some sort of disability, whether it's time, I think we all have things. And I try to be really sensitive to so many writers out there who are as talented, if not more than I, who have yet to have achieved the level of opportunities and success that I have. So I try to help others, and I have been helped by others. To answer your question, I don't know if I can speak to any one aspect of me, any protected class that was defining in my growth. I do think I've benefited tremendously from the Sesame Street Writers Fellowship, from the Disney ABC Writers Fellowship, from the South Asian Salon Fellowship, and then the current one I'm currently in, which is Unlock Her Potential. And all of those focus on more on underrepresented voices. So often women of color. I think those are mostly the protected classes they try to elevate.
Okay, and how important it is to go through these programs, because in India we don't have too many of these programs, and how
For
important it
me,
is to put these programs in place, yeah, for writers.
yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, for me, they were life-changing. They were the reason I got staffed and noticed. They totally gave me a leg up. I am forever indebted to them. I don't think that's the only way, however. I think that that's one way. But I don't think that you have to think, oh, I didn't get into the program, I'm not a good writer. I didn't get into the program, I don't have a chance. The other thing to keep in mind, again, and this is something that I echo from what I said earlier, is there's no one right, wrong way in this industry, however exciting and frustrating that is. it really is just, what can I control? I can control my work ethic. I can control improving my writing. I can control how many people I meet. I can control how many people I help. Those are the things that I would focus on, because the rejection is inordinate. So I think the programs are helpful, but one of the programs I applied 5 years in a row and got rejected. And it was the fifth year that I got in. You just never know.
Wow. So it requires tenacity, patience, and to really keep at it. And so let's get on to a few more questions before you move on to your masterclass, since we are
Sure.
running short on time. So, what's the difference between writing for animation and writing for live action? How different it is, apart from the
Yeah,
writer's room and
sure. I think so the more obvious aspects that are different in animation than live action is kind of what I spoke to earlier, is you should ask yourself, if you're writing an animated script, why does this have to be animation? Why am I visualizing this in animation versus live action? Because often somebody on the other side of the table who is reading your script, who is going over your story, who is considering buying it, optioning it, will say, what about this makes it animated? Because I think in animation, what we're looking for is that idea of world building, that sense that this world is slightly hyperbolic, it's elevated, it has its own rules that are completely disparate from those of reality. And so therefore we need some magical, supernatural, fantastical aspect to be highlighted. And therefore animation allows us to do that. So really leaning into, what about the cartoon, caricature, visual, cinematic effects that animation can do really illustrates your story. So I would say that's one thing. I would also say in animation, especially in kids animation, in the US in particular, because it's so based in child psychology, how we tell a story is often very specific to kids TV here, which is usually 11-minute segments. So let's say there's a half-hour slot for a kids TV show. There will be two 11-minute episodes, because then you allow 8 minutes for advertisements or so forth. If it's streaming, it's just, the two 11-minute episodes. In kids TV and in kind of child psychology in America, especially, it's very much about safety. It's very much about reducing liability. It's very much about repetition. So they'll usually sing a song. They'll usually show the kids, hey, we're going on an adventure. And that will be the signal to the child who's watching. This is what we see over and over within the episode, and then in each of the episodes for the whole show. So it's really giving that child a sense of, you're on this journey with me, and holding their hand a little bit. Then it is really highlighting safety. So if the child is getting on a bike, it's, let me put my helmet on, and they'll often say it and do the activity. I don't think I saw that as much when I grew up in the summers in India, like with kids TV. I don't think there was that much attention given to safety and liability concerns, but that's a huge aspect of it. And I also think kids TV here is couched in a very positive and constructive way of learning a lesson, and really tries to steer clear of anything that might be construed as adult, an adult aspect, like something about loss or something that really delves into something very, very dark. They'll use they may touch it, but in a very protected, safe way. So I would say those are like the distinct differences that come to mind when I think of animation, live action, and then within animation, adult and kids.
Okay, that's great insights. Now, you know, you mentioned to me when I spoke to you earlier that there is writing for American audiences and there's writing for global audiences. Uh, I really thought that a story is a story, and you don't write for a specific audience. And a story which is written well and which is structured well, you have the different act structures that works all over the world. But you told me that, you mentioned to me that writing for American TV is different from writing for a global audience. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's, first of all, when you write something, you want to really keep your audience in mind. Um, I think, and I'll get into that a little bit later when I maybe talk about some of the tenets in the master class. But I think your audience can be as specific or as universal as you or your network or studio want it to be. But I think it's really important to identify it because it definitely tells you what is the language, what is the level of maturity, what is the average audience member's experience. If I'm talking to, so for example, I'm writing a pilot right now on the prevention of mother-to-child transmission of HIV/AIDS. That concept is very universal or very understandable to some communities and some countries in the world. And then for others, we're blissfully unaware and or ignorant to it. So I really have to think when an executive reads this, how much do I have to explain versus say, hey, you'll figure it out in the content. I don't want to be too expository. So you're constantly gauging these things of how do I build a relationship with the reader, with the viewer, without it feeling disingenuous, without it feeling like, oh, I'm kind of cheating and telling you how to feel, and I'm manipulating you instead of earning this. But also, if it's too esoteric, if it's too above their comprehension, if it's foreign to them, then you lose them. So a lot of my favorite shows do a great job of weaving in these authentic explanations to a story that feel very organic instead of feeling forced, so that we can follow and say, oh, this is what's happening in this world. It's like, oh no, something happened. And now from that, we've inferred this is how things work in this world.
Great. So I'm just going to ask you one last question and then leave you with your last thoughts before you go on to your masterclass. So you being Indian, but you've grown up in America, you were born in America, then you went back to India, you studied in America, you built a career, and now you switched careers midway. Some would call it a midlife crisis. Some would call it following your calling. Uh, so would you in any at any occasion at any time like to come back to India and contribute what you learned in Hollywood so that the Indian animation industry could learn some of the best in class tenets to write for kids, write for animation, adult animation, or for whatever it is.
I mean, I love India. It was my first language, Hindi. I speak, read, and write it. I spent every summer in Nimaj and Chapali, which is where my mom and dad are from, respectively. And it was such a big thing for them that you will know where you came from. And it's why I studied Kathak for 15 years of my life. So I would love the opportunity to be invited back to India. I mean, I'll go personally anyway, but professionally, I mean, some of my favorite shows, Dilly Crime, Chinoti from when I was growing up, are like things that I just absolutely, and my favorite movies, Yavada Raha, Mahan, Agnipath, Coolie, like those are the things that made me a writer. I mean, India in its storytelling is so poetic and moving in a way that I'm so indebted to that storytelling. The words, the moments that we create, it feels like poetry in motion to me. So I would love to be considered.
Fantastic, even at Indian wages, if that's okay with you. Though some of the writers are
I
being
think
paid at
I
film.
think yeah, no, I mean, I'm a playwright at first and foremost at heart, so I definitely know that art trumps money. I mean, we all have to make a living, but yeah, I think if the project is right, I would absolutely consider it.
All right. Look forward to having you back in India at some stage at working with the Cartoon Networks of the world, the Nickelodeons, or the Indian kids networks like Gubbare, like ETV Bharat, which are coming up have started coming up in recent times. And in the meanwhile, I'll bid you goodbye from my side. Thank you for chatting with me, and thank you for giving those insights. We could go on for a longer time, but we have limited time at hand. And we'd love to hear from you, have a masterclass from you on the animation writing side. Over to you, Naina. I'm going to switch off my
Okay.
camera now. Thank you very
All
much.
right. Thank you so much, Anilji. And I also want to
Yeah,
just
thank you.
send out a special thank you to Prerna and Benita, who have just been so lovely in making all of this happen. So I'm so honored to be here, and I will share with you my thoughts. And I thought, Anilji offered
Yeah,
a
I'm going to
perfect.
pause you for a second. Yeah, I'm going to thank Nicole Levy for getting us in
Okay.
touch with you. Though we cannot forget to thank Nicole because
No,
she's an
we can't.
amazing lady, amazing
She's so
lady.
lovely.
She got us
She's one
connected.
of my favorite
Thank you.
people. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you for that. I appreciate that.
yeah.
Um, so I thought in our time that we have today, that one of the things that to me is always helpful is this industry can be very, very subjective and open-ended, and I like very specific answers to things. I am, an economist and mathematician at heart, and so I like things to be very didactic and very specific. So there is a famous list, and you can Google this, quite frankly, of the 22 rules of writing by Pixar. So it's very specific to animation writing, which is lovely. But in addition, it's just very specific to any type of writing: live action, animation, adult, children, movies, TV. So I'm going to very quickly but thoroughly take you through this list because I think reading them, but also understanding how I apply them will be very helpful and illuminate how you develop story, how you connect with story, and then ultimately how you complete your story. Okay, so the 22 rules of storytelling according to Pixar. The first one is you admire a character for trying more than for their successes. So think of your favorite character in a movie. I'm going to go with E.T. and hoping that that is a movie that most people can relate to, but you should pick your favorite movie. And in that movie, we see a young boy who is trying so hard to connect with this new alien that has come to his world. And he's not always successful, and their relationship is very clumsy, and he doesn't understand what he wants. And he goes through his own journey of failures and wins. But what we love about Elliot, the lead boy, is that he's relatable. If he was constantly successful, we don't know we can't really relate to him, and we don't really know what his journey is. What is he learning? If he already knows everything, there's not really much more to go. But we can all relate to being scared, to being humble, to being excited, that kind of childlike wonder that comes with learning something new and ultimately achieving success. So always look for a character, always develop characters who are trying more than those who are certain and successful. Number two, you've got to keep in mind what's interesting to you as an audience, not what's fun to do as a writer. They can be very different. And I think Anilji really set me up for this point in talking about, who is your audience? So one, it's very important to know who your audience is young, old, English speaking, otherwise, what are their sensibilities? What is the culture in which they grow up? What do they need explained to them versus what they understand? But this is saying that as a writer, often I will think something is so moving and funny, especially when I write about my own life. I'll get caught up in like, oh, but that's the moment I learned this. But it's not necessary for the story. It's just really a moment that I love. So we have this expression in Hollywood, killing your darlings. And what that means is going through your script and saying, is this scene, is this moment, is this aspect, this storyline earning its real estate? And often you will find that it's you as the writer who really loves it, but the audience is not really being served in hearing this story. So you have to strike it, which is so painful, but really critical to honoring the rule number two, which is you've got to keep in mind what's interesting to your audience, not what's fun to do as a writer. Number three, trying for theme is important, but you won't see what the story is actually about till you're at the end of it. Now rewrite. So I think we get caught up often in saying, okay, I'm going to treat this like a math problem or like as a complete work from the initial stage. I will outline, I will fill in the outlines, I will make sure that there's proper structure. Well, what you'll learn along the way is that your characters will speak to you. Your story will take you on a different journey. And so to be malleable and not to be so rigid, that you can't see, that you have to go kind of off your path and your plan will set you back. Story is fluid. And often you will find things and discover things as your characters are discovering things. So it's very exciting and it's very humbling. And in that, to go to this rule, you will find the theme. Sometimes what the theme is initially ends up being tweaked a bit toward the end because of something a character does or because of something that happens in the environment that changes your view of the characters. So Be thoughtful, but be willing to be fluid and malleable in that. Number 4, I think this is such a great tenet. So once upon a time, there was a blank. Every day, blank. One day, blank. Because of that, blank. Because of that, blank. Until finally, blank. So what do I mean by all these blanks? What does Pixar mean by this? It's giving you a sense of structure. It's saying, so for example, if I try to do the E.T. movie, according to this, once upon a time, there was a boy. Every day he would go off and seek adventures in the woods with his friends. One day, he runs into an alien. Because of that, he is sent on a journey to develop a relationship with this alien. Because of that, the government descends upon his home and his community to catch this alien, until finally the boy finds a way to sneak out and to outsmart the government and save the alien. So what we learned there is the beginning, the obstacles as they grow, right? Because first it's meeting the alien, then it's developing a relationship with the alien, then it's people finding out about the alien, then it's the government trying to capture the alien. We're seeing how it escalates. It crescendos until we get that final satisfying conclusion of he was able to triumph and save the alien. So it's a great way, the rule number 4 is to make sure that your story is progressing and escalating. You always want to increase the stakes. Number 5, simplify focus, combine characters, hop over detours. You'll feel like you're losing valuable stuff, but it sets you free. This is very similar to the tenet that I had stated earlier, which is killing your darlings. Really be economical with writing. There's a saying, you come to the party late and you leave early. Your scenes should begin where we're already like at the party. It's not about coming to the party. And then before the party is over, we should cut out. Those are broad strokes, but what I'm saying is drop us into the drama of the scene, as opposed to spending so much time setting up the scene and then closing out the scene. Saying hello and goodbye is often unnecessary. It's show me about the fight or the big moment that's going to happen in the scene and really focus on that. So being very economical with what you want the audience to focus on and where we're going to live in that moment. Number 6, what is your character good at, comfortable with? Throw the polar opposite at them, challenge them. How do you deal? So this is an exercise I do a lot when I'm writing, where I will think, okay, the character has to cross the bridge. The character has to cross the bridge. What do they need to do? They're afraid of heights. They have a certain amount of time. The bridge is going to blow up. The bridge is rickety. And I'm not feeling that it's in line with what this character would do, but I just want them to cross the bridge because they have to. The story exists beyond the bridge, but it's not authentic to the character. So then I say, okay, what would happen if the character refuses to cross this bridge? Even if it's not where my story is going, that is what my character would actually do. And I force myself then to say, forget about what's going to happen to the story. Tell me what this character would do. And you'd be surprised. You get more into the character's head and you find a way. Maybe she goes on a long walk and finds, a raft and gets across the bridge that way. Maybe she climbs a tree and sees another way of getting across. Maybe she's able to signal to a helicopter. But what it does is it opens your mind to all the possibilities that feel authentic to your character. Number 7, come up with your ending before you figure out your middle. Seriously, endings are hard. Get yours working up front. I think this speaks a lot to outlining, and it gives you just a journey. It gives you a path to really follow. Like, if I have to ultimately get here, how do I do it? Or what am I arcing toward? If she starts off in school and by the end she's graduating, what are those 4 years or however long colleges look like for her? And we know that she's in school, we know that she's going to go through these certain challenges, and we know that she's going to graduate. Again, these might change, but it helps you understand where you're headed. Number 8, finish your story. Let go even if it's not perfect. In an ideal world, you have both, but move on. Do better next time. I think this is so important, is to follow through. I have written so many bad scripts, and sometimes I've abandoned them, so I haven't completely followed this rule. But I think what's really important is finishing the story as an exercise. because stories often, we all start out really excited and then they kind of lose momentum and then we get frustrated and then we abandon them. Start small, write a 10-page story, write a first-person narrative, but finish it. You will learn where you get frustrated, where you get bored, where you feel like, oh, I would rather clean my house than do this. You'll go through that experience as a writer, and you will learn so much about yourself, both personally and professionally. So try to finish what you start. Number 9, when you're stuck, make a list of what would not happen next. Lots of times the material to get you unstuck will show up. And I think this really echoes the point that I was saying about being authentic to your character. And even if the character has to cross the bridge, if that's not what the character would do, stay with the character. Here we're saying what would not happen next, right? Make a list of those things. And it will free up your mind from what you feel like, oh my gosh, it can't go this way. It can't be this way. It just opens your point of view and frees you from this kind of rigidity that you're probably experiencing in that moment. Number 10, pull apart the stories you like. What you like in them is a part of you. You've got to recognize it before you can use it. So pulling apart the stories you like, I've watched E.T., as I mentioned many times, and I've studied it. I would really encourage all of you to rewatch your favorite TV show or movie. Really study structure, really see what they're doing well and not doing well. What is the moment where you thought, I don't believe this, or this doesn't feel like the right tone? What is the moment where it just makes you cry every time? That is such an incredible part. Just being a consumer of content really helps inform who you are as a writer. Number 11, putting it on paper lets you start fixing it. If it stays in your head, a perfect idea, you'll never share it with anyone. And I think this goes back to also just finishing what you start. Get it out on paper, sit with it, finish it. I mean, it sounds really obvious, but we all know writer's block is a real thing. Sitting with something, creating that discipline, time, and space is really critical to being a successful writer. Even if you never end up showing the draft to somebody, you will learn something and you should be proud of it. Number 12, discount the first thing that comes to mind and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. Get the obvious out of the way. Surprise yourself. So this is an exercise I often do when I'm writing something where I think, oh my God, this is such a boring story. Who cares? But then I think, what is interesting about this story? Or what is the exact opposite of this moment? Like something, I think it was one of the tenets earlier in the Pixar tenets of whatever you're thinking of doing, do the opposite of it. How does that open your mind? So I was telling a story of a girl who wanted to confront her mother about something and it was getting very angry. And then I thought, what if the mother confronts the daughter? But the mother doesn't have that information. So how can she confront the daughter? So I had a lot of funny stories of, does the mother just sense this about the daughter? And then what kind of relationship do the mother and daughter have that the mother can sense these things? Does the mother suspect something and trick her because maybe the daughter's best friend tipped the mother off? It just really opens up your mind to saying it does not have to be seen this one way. And even if you decide to go a different way, often you'll just find that something much more economical and much more multitasking in terms of setting the scene, establishing the characters, and letting us know what the stakes are will appear. And that's a great first opening scene to have, is to establish all those things. Number 13, give your characters opinions. Passive malleable might seem likable to you as you write, but it's poison to the audience. In E.T., we have a young boy who is super cute, so he's very likable, but he is very rambunctious. He's very outspoken. He hurts people's feelings, and yet you still love him. He's learning. He is not perfect. He does lots of wrong things. He says a lot of wrong things, but we can relate to him because he's not perfect. When you make a character so perfect, there's not as much to root for. And flaws are very interesting and relatable. So always look to characters who have opinions and who are active and who are flawed. Number 14, I love this one. Why must you tell this story? And what that means, why should I tell this story versus Anilji versus Benita versus Prerna? This story feels specific because I, Nayna, am telling this story. If Anilji or Benita or Prerna were telling the story, it would be very different. It could be the same concept, but it's going to be through their eyes and through their perspective and with their sense of humor and their sense of timing. So when you are sharing this story or when you are pitching this story, you really want to infuse your sense of self in it. What about this story speaks to you? What feels personal to you? Number 15, if you were your character in this situation, how would you feel? Honesty lends credibility to unbelievable situations. This goes back to that paradigm I was sharing about crossing the bridge. You know, really be in your character's head, even if it creates challenges for you because you need to get her across the bridge. The audience won't believe it if you don't believe it. So it's okay to be stuck and say, I need to get her across the bridge, because maybe you don't need to. Maybe you need to see things differently. And we will always, as an audience, appreciate if the character rings authentic to us versus something in service of advancing the plot. Number 16, what are the stakes? Give us reason to root for the character. What happens if they don't exceed? Stack the odds against. This goes back to that earlier tenet that I had where it said one day this happened and then this happened, which led to this thing happening. Escalate, further antagonize your character. We want to know what's at stake. We want to be rooting for them. We want to be sitting on the perch of our seat in anticipation, our hearts racing, thinking, are they going to do it? Are they going to win? Are they going to be okay? You want your characters to feel alive, and you want to be on this journey where it feels like the impossible is going to happen. Number 17, no work is ever wasted. If it's not working, let go and move on. I think this goes back to finishing drafts. It's so hard when you want to abandon something, when you've lost the joy, you feel frustrated. This happened to me recently on a script where I thought, I don't even know what this is anymore. It's so removed from my original version. Nobody seems to like it. And I took a break from it. And then I came back to it. And then I rebroke the story. And it was a lot of work and it was a lot of humility. But I think I learned a lot. I'm always learning, but I've also learned to give myself time, to give myself space whenever possible. Sometimes you have deadlines and it's not possible, but really no work is ever wasted. If it's done with the intent of learning, if it's done with the intent of really putting your heart on the page, I truly believe that no work is ever wasted. Number 18, you have to know yourself. The difference between doing your best and fussing. Story is testing, not refining. For me, what this means is, and I spoke about this a little bit with Anil G, like knowing yourself as a writer. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What are the, typical machinations and plot devices you fall into because you want to cover a lot of story or you want something to be particularly clear? It's not necessarily bad, but just be mindful of those habits that you have, and should you be broken of them or when to really exercise them. We all have them. And so knowing that you can identify them and just ask yourself the question, have I earned this? Is this the best way of conveying this message? I think is really important. Number 19, coincidences to get characters into trouble are great. Coincidences to get them out of them are cheating. So if something makes a character's life easy and it feels like a big coincidence, it's probably something you want to revisit. If it's something where you can't believe these things are happening, but it makes the character's life harder, that to me, and what Pixar is saying here, has earned its worth in the script. And I think what we're really getting at there is that we want to make it as hard on the writer and the character to navigate this journey that we're on. And so when they are working against us as the writer and the character, we believe it, and we're more engaged in the sense of like, if it's escalating, what's going to happen next? So many things are working against, the odds are stacked against our character. What now? Number 20, take the building blocks of a movie you dislike. How do you arrange them into what you like? I think this is similar to the one where you look at a favorite show and you dissect it. I often dissect scripts that I don't like. And I think, this is a good cautionary tale, a good what not to do in terms of telling a story. So I think it's a nice foil to the earlier tenet of pick a movie or show that you like and pick a movie or show that you don't like and really study them. Number 21, you got to identify with your situation and characters can't just write cool. What would make you act that way? So I think this is a similar theme that's come up in a few other tenets, but what makes this one different is really infusing a personal sense of self into a character. So sometimes you're going to be writing about somebody you've never crossed paths with or you cannot relate to, or so you think. Maybe it's a murderer, maybe it's a CEO, maybe it's, an astronaut. You're like, I've never led those careers. I can't relate. The great thing about the human condition is we all have similar experiences, just maybe in different ways. So maybe you've never gone to space, how many of us have, but you've embarked on a journey that is unprecedented. You've embarked on a journey that is dangerous. You've embarked on a journey that is bigger than yourself. What did that feel like to you? Chances are that your astronaut's going to feel the same way. So finding your sense of self in every character, as opposed to saying, I would never do that, or I cannot relate to this character, is really key in bringing your voice to life. And then the last one, number 22, what's the essence of your story? Most economical telling of it. If you know that, you can build from there. So I have this habit of making things overly complicated. I feel like if I make it simple, it'll be boring. When in actuality, the things that are the simplest are often the cleanest. And you can always add layers, you can always add expression, you can always add complications, but at its heart, it should be a simple story that we can arc very cleanly, and then we can add elements to it. So really start with, what do you think the theme is? What do you think the journey is? What do you think the character and its arc is? Try to keep it as simple as possible. Try to be able to state it in a statement or a question. What is the character seeking could be the question, and then stating what it's about should be one statement. It will get way more complicated, much faster, way more quickly. But I think it's really important to just start off by saying, what is the story? And being very clear in your mind before things start to get garbled and conflicted, so that you can always come back and say, wait, what is the question I'm trying to ask and answer? And what is the statement that I want to stand by and underscore? So those are the 22 rules. Thank you to Pixar, and thank you all for listening. And I hope it was helpful.
Fantastic. That was great, Naina. I'm going to have another masterclass with you in the future when you have the time, where we actually go into creating an animated script, creating the characters, creating the world, and that'll be interesting. But this was a great way to begin in, getting our heads around the tenets of Pixar, and using them when we write. Thank you very much. I believe you have we're on the button right now, actually
We really
on the
are.
top. So yeah. So thank you again for taking your time out when you're on the. Are you on the lot right now? Are you on the
I
filming lot,
am.
or where are
I
you?
am. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you for taking your time out to be with us and explain to us. And look forward to having you back in India at some stage, maybe working on a project for one of the either the film studios or for an animation studio. I think it'll be great to merge what you've learned with what we are attempting to do here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to staying in touch.